Well, by my clock, it is 11:30, and we have an incredibly special presentation tonight or this afternoon here on the Able Act, but we're actually featuring the STABLE program, which is Ohio's Able Act program, which will be available soon. Now, we have been talking about the Able Act now for years, and what's really exciting is that it looks as though Ohio will be the first program to open, and even if it's not the first, it'll be amongst the first. So we're going from theory into reality. So what we're going to do here is that our panel consists of Juliana Crist, who will be doing most of the presentation towards the end. Brian McDonald is on our panel, and he's with the World Institute on Disabilities and an incredible website that he's going to show us called Disability Benefits 101.org here. And what he's going to do is show us a little bit about his website and a little bit about some of the materials they're putting up about the ABLE program and how this is a tool that'll help folks. And as we're going to learn as we talk about ABLE, one of the great aspects of ABLE is helping folks that are disabled and working to be able to go over the resource limit. Okay, we have Tony Anderson, who's the executive director of the ARC of California and on the board of the ARC US. He also led the Lanterman Coalition, and the reason we asked him tonight to just give a little talk about what he's doing and a little bit about, you know, why the ABLE Act is important to the community that he serves and the education that's going to be necessary is that he'll give us an overview, a lot of this focused on folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I've asked Mary Eble, who's the executive director of the North Bay Housing Coalition and also the executive director of the Golden State Pool Trust, to focus on a little bit about her program. And one of the reasons we had asked her to be on the panel is that housing is another area where ABLE is going to give us some new tools and some new options coming up. Now, of course, my name is Steve Dale. I am the trustee of the Golden State Pool Trust. For those of you that are not familiar with this program, we do this on about once a month. This is our study group, and it's open to anybody who would like to listen. And part of this is to educate attorneys, advocates, families about all different aspects of providing quality of life to persons with disabilities, and this is part of our ongoing series. So anyway, I'm going to start off by turning over the screen here to Brian McDonald.
Thank you, Steve. This is Brian McDonald at the World Institute on Disability in Berkeley, California. I'm joined by Tom Foley as well, our deputy director. And as Dale noted, DB101 is very easy to get to. It's at db101.org. And many of you on the call in California are familiar with DB101 because we've been up and running about 12 years now. The reason why Dale asked us on the call was to showcase that as the ABLE Act opens up its programming across the country in individual states, we will have basic information on the ABLE Act, what it is, and where to go to get more information about particular state implementation. You see on the screen there in our asset building article, Building Your Assets and Wealth, our new edition on ABLE accounts. And we want to emphasize for folks who don't know anything about government speak, so to speak, the DB101 website will present this information and update it in a very plain language register for folks who are not familiar with government jargon. So I wanted to show you all our current offering. As you see, it was updated April 29th. We'll be updating this information as the states of Ohio and Nebraska and other early states launch their programming. And it's a plain language register set of information for beginners to this whole content arena. It's a very big deal, as everyone knows, for folks on SSI and Medicaid and Medi-Cal. Finally, on July 8th, the World Institute on Disability will have guest presenter Stephen Dale, and other national speakers at a Eble forum from 9 a.m. to noon at the Ed Roberts campus in Berkeley, California. So mark your calendar for that event, which will be a follow-along and follow-up to what's happening today. Thank you, Dale, for allowing us to make a few comments.
Thanks a lot. And for those of you that are not familiar with the DB 101 website, and we will be sending out links to these websites after the presentation, this is something you should definitely bookmark no matter what state you're in.
Well, thank you, Steve, for having me on. And I will try to go quickly. I know when the senator says you've got 3 minutes, you try to push for 5 and see what you can get. No, I will behave. My name is Tony Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the ARC California, as mentioned earlier. I also run a coalition called the Lanterman Coalition, and Steve had mentioned that. That is a coalition of about 22 now, statewide organizations in California, all with some touch on the developmental disabilities community. And so the coalition, some of them provide a variety of different kinds of services and supports, and some are advocacy only, or systems only, some part of the system. It includes the Regional Centers Association, the ARC, and United Cerebral Palsy, and Disability Rights California, and supported living. Every aspect of the community that you can think of is there in that one room, and somehow we managed to get work done, and everybody has got a lot of energy and great passion. So it's not easy to do, keep all these folks together on the same page, but we have been very focused and doing great work. What I wanted to try to touch on real quick related to Eble was how we see the world, at least from where we stand, and all the stressors and why we would need the Eble Act and other issues as well. So first, I just want to touch on this piece on the income. So if you look at the income of people today and what's happened to their income, there's a great campaign going on right now called CA for SSI, and I encourage you to go to that website. And there's a great campaign, and it's focused on this SSI, SSP portion in California. And just real quickly, during the recession, there were some major cuts, everywhere to health and human services, and in particular to your income level. If you're receiving SSI in California, the SSP grant was cut. And so we've been looking at now our folks are living off of about 90% of poverty level in the state, and we have not really been able to recover those cuts, the money that was taken away from people with disabilities in their SSP grant. In addition, when you try to figure, well, how do you become self-sufficient, then get your own money and try to build on that, there's a lot of work being done to try to improve in this area, and yet still only 12.4% of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities are employed. And even those employed, the average wage is, I've got here, $5.23, and so as you can imagine, you're living in extreme poverty here, and low poverty. And so, and then the cost of living continues to increase, and during this time it's been a 14% rise. So the picture we're showing is less and less income in this area, and higher and higher costs. And the last piece of that is that there's this asset limit, probably will be talked about quite a bit more, but you can't have assets beyond $2,000, and you can imagine you've got to press that down the whole time, and yet try to live in today's environment. So your income is really pushed down, and it's really hard for us to get out of that. And then if you look on the national spending, so what is the country doing to support people with developmental disabilities? And you see in this graph right here, this chart, that over the last 35 years, it's been a pretty steady decline in the commitment to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the community and in institutional care. Now, we'd be excited about the institutional care piece. That's what we're pushing for. But we would rather see the community part of this budget increasing. But as you can tell here, the country has continually spent less and less on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then in California alone, our state here, we're looking at today we're spending 10% less on people with disabilities. So the commitment in California continues to decrease. We've had 50-plus changes to our Lanterman Act, and all of them were to save money, and most of them are still in play today, even though the recession we've been beyond the recession now. So over $1 billion removed from the system, and the community system is continuing to live under, under poor funding mechanisms. Now, we did get a great win this year with the Lanterman Coalition, pushing for more funding to try to rebuild on the community system, but it's going to take a long time to turn that around. And then finally, just sort of looking at the settings where people are living now. You'll hear more about the housing, so I won't get a lot more on that, but if you think about that, most of the counties in our state exceed 100% of SSI, SSP. So you're going to have to live in below average housing or find other ways to get affordable housing, but we're losing in that area as well. 50,000 adults are living in supported living or independent living, and 30,000 in licensed group homes. But think about it, we have 300,000 people in our system today, and half of them are adults. So we're looking at where are people going to be living, and how do they become more independent and move along forward. And then we also have 100,000 people, about 100,000 living with aging caregivers. And the life expectancy of people with disabilities is now increasing, which is the great news. But that means that there is going to be that life beyond your own life. The life of your son and daughter will continue on further. And that's one of the fears. My membership are primarily family members, and that's a constant conversation we have. So, and then the last two are just about the value of caregivers and how much caregivers do. And during these years, during all these budget cuts, caregivers have been relied on to do even more. And these are sort of the numbers. They're valued at $144 to estimated at $188 billion annually in this country. And that's the value of the caregivers if you were to have to pay for them. And then finally, out of pocket, the research shows that about $300,000 is spent on caregivers in general, from lost wages, benefits, and the like. And so that can't keep going on forever. So just quickly in review, so how do we see this world? Why do we need Eble? We've talked about the national and the state commitment diminishing and continuing to diminish over time. Employment, how do you become self-sufficient? There's a lot we have to keep pushing on, but can Eble help us? We see that there could be some places for some people. It could be a help. And then no affordable places to live. Can you use Eble to help with that? You'll hear that you can. And the Special Needs Trust, it's been something that our family members have been relying on for many years, but in many cases it's cost prohibitive if you don't have a lot of money. And then going that route is not something that a lot of our family members can do. So is this an easier route for us? Can it help? And we say, yes, it can, and we're looking forward to being able to use Eble to at least minimize some of what we're dealing with here. So.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Tony, and there's going to be a lot of education needed, and once again, adding another sustainable funding source is certainly something that helps. So Mary, how do you see Eble as helping folks with housing issues, and what are some of the issues that our families are dealing with?
Sure. So let me go through my slides just briefly. North Bay Housing Coalition, we're a nonprofit based in Napa. We are the underlying nonprofit with the Golden State Pool Trust, who Steve is our trustee. Our focus, our primary mission is affordable housing for persons with developmental disabilities. And there are several housing coalitions similar to my agency throughout the state of California. We've actually formed an alliance called the Lanterman Housing Alliance. And our focus is, again, affordable housing for people with developmental disabilities. My agency works closely in terms of housing services with families to create long-term, person-centered housing plans. The I'll just keep going and show you some stats and kind of building on what Tony shared. And also we do have some people who, individuals with disabilities who want to actually own their own home. We've helped a few people do that through North Bay Housing as well as Golden State Pool Trust. Just in terms of some statistics, this is coming from the Technical Assistance Collaborative. It's just very depressing. This is national statistics. Just the fact that individuals on SSI cannot afford to live in their own one-bedroom apartment. There's just no way they have no money left over for food, transportation, clothing, and other needs. It's just not affordable. And there's also a lack of commitment at the federal level for creating more affordable housing, HUD and 811s and Section 8, all the traditional means of creating affordable housing, and just due to budgetary concerns and focus at the federal level. And at the state level, we've had some reductions locally for the local cities, and the redevelopment agencies have been cut significantly. So there's not a lot of new affordable housing coming online. So what is it that people can do in terms of moving us forward? So there's a real disparity. This is also from the Technical Assistance Collaborative, and I picked California, and I'll just show you, like in Napa, for example, you have to, a one-bedroom rent is 129% of the SSI benefits. There's just no way that people come to us all the time, they want to live in their own place, they have dreams of having that independence, and we want to support them. However, without affordable housing and other subsidies like Section 8, it just can't work. So families are really desperate to figure out how to ensure stable, affordable housing for their loved ones. And as Tony said, there are a lot of people who continue to live in the family home. I have a nephew with Down syndrome who lives with me and my sister. We need to think about his future. We have some plans in place. But Able Act provides a new option that's quite exciting. And I'll give an example here. There is a mother, pre-Able, who bought a house for her son who receives SSI. She thought this would be great. He'd only have to pay $400 a month in rent to her. And then SSA evaluated her case her son's case, and determined that she was subsidizing the rent, and they took the PMB reduction, and now he has a lower, monthly benefit. So what's exciting to me and my colleagues in being able to share more about the ABLE accounts that are rolling out across the country is that we can educate families about the opportunity and really think through how to incorporate an ABLE account into their planning, so that if they do think about buying a home, or they have their son or daughter applying for an apartment on the open market, which is just not going to be affordable for them, they can afford it, and they can think about, well, let me fund an ABLE account and pay rent at that without having the reduction. So we're quite excited about offering that as a tool for families to consider in developing their long-term housing plans.
Fantastic. Okay. And with that, I'm going to work through just some very basics here on ABLE, and then we'll turn it over to Juliana, who will tell us about her program. So this is the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act of 2014 passed. It's one of the last pieces of legislation in 2014, which allowed, beginning in 2015, the option of establishing ABLE programs across the country in different states, modeled after the current 529 savings accounts. To be eligible, there's two levels of eligibility here. The first thing is, under current law, you must your disability must have began before the age of 26. And this is based on the same criteria as SSI or Medicaid here, is that you have to have a disability that meets the same rules as SSI or Social Security disability. So if you're getting SSI or getting SSD before the age of 26, you automatically qualify. By the way, as far as learning about those, what's required to be eligible for those programs, once again, DB 101 .org is a great source for this. Now, the other way to do it is through a doctor's certificate here and self-reporting here. That basically you meet the same level of disability here as those getting SSI or SSDI, which is basically the inability to earn the substantial gainful activity amount here based on a disability likely to last a year or longer or end in death. Once again, you can either do it by showing that you are receiving these programs, or you can do it through a certification process. If you do it through a certification process, you cannot use that certification to turn around and secure SSI or Medicaid, Medi-Cal in our state. So once again, it's not a shortcut to eligibility here, but it is another option. I will mention this one thing. For those with developmental disabilities, by definition, the disability is before the age of 18. But for somebody, for instance, with a mental health disability or a physical disability here, it's not always clear when the disability began. So there's many folks who maybe didn't start getting benefits until they're in their 30s or so, but they may have met that definition before the age of 26. So this is something, once again, we'll all want to explore. Other key features here: contributions into an Eble account can be made by any person, and what we're learning through the Department of Treasury regulations and Social Security itself is any person is a very broad thing, so it could be a trust. So contributions can be from almost any place. The contributions are not tax deductible. So if you're making a contribution, for instance, I will certainly be opening up one of these accounts for my niece, and the contributions I make will not be tax deductible. Income earned by the accounts are not taxed. And account withdrawals, including portions attributable to investment earnings generated by the account for qualified expenses, would not be taxable as well. Individuals are limited to one Eble account, and for those of you who have been following this, these rules have changed several times. Under the current rules, you're limited to one Eble account, and the total annual contributions by all individuals can be no more than whatever the gift tax limit is for that year. So this year it is $14,000. Here. Oftentimes there's cost of living increases, so eventually it'll go up to 15, then 16, then 17. But for right now, the limit will be $14,000 in 2016. Aggregate contributions are subject to the overall limit of whatever that state's 529 plan is. So there's an annual limit that you can put in, and then there's a cumulative limit that you can put in. Now, for instance, when California has its plan together, our 529 plan limit is $350,000. So if you were to open up a California plan, the most you could put in is $350,000. As we're going to see, Ohio's numbers are different. Now, just as an aside, I have a feeling that I will never see a maxed out 529 plan in California because it would take approximately 25 years to reach that limit here. But, you know, once again, different states will have different limits. So, as far as contributions are concerned, there are two levels of contributions. For someone who is on SSI, as long as the account is $100,000 or less, it will not interfere with eligibility for SSI. Once it goes over $100,000 here, that whatever is greater than that starts counting towards towards the resource limit. So theoretically, you could have $102,000 in this account. But once it goes over $100,000, your SSI goes into suspension. And that's an important concept here. But your Medi-Cal or your Medicaid continues until you hit the cumulative limit. Once again, in California, 350,000. Here, Ohio has a slightly larger number. And one of these things is when folks do analyze this is not everybody with a disability is on SSI. Here, many folks with developmental disabilities eventually end up on a childhood disability benefits program. So this is once again where education websites like db101.org will be really useful in helping you. If the beneficiary is receiving SSI when the assets in the account total $100,000, then it's placed in suspension. For those of you who have ever been involved in applying for SSI, why would you want to do that a second time? So here, the really cool thing is that by being placed in suspension, you don't have to reapply. And when the assets in the Eble account drop below $100,000, the suspension ceases and the SSI benefits resume, and you do not have to reapply for SSI. Eble account beneficiaries do not lose their Medi-Cal eligibility based on assets in the Eble account or suspension for SSI benefits. So for instance, once again, if a Californian were to open up a plan in Ohio, you could put as much as $426,000 in it, and hopefully when Juliana comes on here, she can confirm that that's the correct number, okay? So therefore, if contributions exceed $100,000, SSI eligibility would be lost, but as long as the account remains below $426,000, if you're in the Ohio program, then Medi-Cal eligibility continues. Contributions have to be in cash. So what that means is, like for instance, if I wanted to put appreciated stock into Erica's Eble account, I would actually have to cash it out and realize the gain. So contributions have to be in cash here, unless it's a rollover to another individual. And if these contributions to an Eble account would result in aggregate contributions that exceed that amount here, then once again, you can make that transfer. It does allow transfers during the lifetime in very limited situations to other family members that are listed in this part of the Internal Revenue Code, and that is basically brothers, sisters, stepbrothers, stepsisters. So you can make transfers to other siblings and step-siblings if they meet the definition of being disabled before one's lifetime. For the rollover, as far as we can tell, and I know there's some contributions to that, but you can do the sibling rollover program to beneficiaries, even if they already had their $14,000 contributions for that year. But the other thing that comes up is that as far as we know, the contributions can only be made while the Eble beneficiary is alive. So it's one of those situations where you'd have to monitor this, and if you thought that maybe the Eble beneficiary had a terminal illness and it would be best to make the transfer, what we're being told here is that has to be done during their lifetime. So consider making lifetime rollovers if the presently named beneficiary's health is seriously dire and they have other qualified siblings. Now, what can we use this for? And I'm just going to go over this very briefly because I'm sure Juliana can cover more of this here. But those of us who do a lot of special needs work, I think this is 90% of what we use funds for. So it can be used for education, housing, transportation, employment training and support, assistive technology and personal support services, health, prevention and wellness, financial management and administrative fees. I always have to comment on this. Thank God they have legal fees in there, so there we are. Expenses for oversight and monitoring, and funeral and burial expenses. As we're going to see, the Department of the Treasury is overseeing a lot of these, the rules about what distributions could be made for, and they have made it very clear that they intend to be very, very liberal in their interpretation of what is a qualifying disability. As far as investments are concerned, and once again, I'm sure Juliana will get into this a little bit, if you're looking at setting up any kind of a 529 plan for day trading, this is not the thing for you. Beneficiaries can direct the investments of any contributions no more than 2 times in any calendar year. And as far as those investments are concerned, the investment options would be determined by the state. So one of the things we'll see from Juliana is what are those investing options with the stable program. Contributions are in after-tax dollars, but earnings would grow tax-free, just like a normal 529 plan. Withdrawals must be for qualified expenses, or else the earnings portions would be subject to a regular income tax and a 10% penalty. So here's an example. Okay, Bob over a decade saves $50,000, and over that period, the account earns $10,000 for a total of $60,000. If Bob were to use the $60,000 on a down payment of a home, there would be no taxes due because that's clearly a qualifying expense. If instead Bob were to use $5,000 to pay for a trip to Disneyland, the $5,000 I'm going to say could be taxable, plus a 10% penalty, because from what we can see, recreation wasn't on the list. Once again, the reason that I put maybe here is that so far all the indications we've had is that the Department of Treasury does intend to be very liberal in their interpretation of what is a qualified expense. So this is one of those things where we need to all stay tuned because the rules are being made and interpreted as we follow along. Qualifying individuals or the families are no longer limited to having to do an Eble account in the state where they live. So this is one of the reasons why the rolling out of the stable program is so important to all of us, because it's something that we can all participate in. And there's remains a limit as to only one Eble account per individual. Let's talk real quick about the payback concerned with Eble accounts, okay? And this is something that it's going to take a lot of education. In the event the qualified beneficiary dies with remaining assets in the Eble account, the remaining assets can be used to pay off outstanding bills for qualified disability expenses and then funeral and burial expenses before going to Medicaid. You can also deduct the amount of any premiums paid as part of a Medicaid buy-in program if the state has one. In the event that the qualified beneficiary dies with remaining assets in the trust, once again, the remaining assets in the Eble account after those payments are made are then distributed to any state Medicaid plan that provides medical assistance to the designated beneficiary. The amount of the Medicaid payback is calculated based on the amount paid by Medicaid after the creation of the Eble account. Okay. Now, while the payback, the Medicaid payback, should not be a major consideration when selecting which tool to use, and it's only one factor, this is basically a 529 plan with a lien for any Medicaid used by the beneficiary from the time the account was created. Compare this with a traditional 529 plan where there are no liens. Now here's something just real quickly, because once again we want to get to Juliana as quickly as we can to learn about how her program's going to work. But just very briefly, the way Medicaid paybacks work is almost all states have a Medi-Cal recovery for any Medi-Cal or Medicaid used by the person after the age of 55. So this would be a situation where, let's say we had somebody who owned their own residence and lived to be 65. There would be a lien on that home for any Medicaid used after the age of 55. An Eble account is a little bit different because the lien for that comes after the creation of the Eble account. Okay, so that could be when you set it up when somebody is young, whenever that is when the lien would begin. A third party or an estate planning special needs trust has no lien because the beneficiary actually never owns it. And the D4A trust, which is called a self-settled trust, these are trusts that often hold personal injury settlements and that kind of thing, where it's the benefits recipient's own funds. Those have a lien for any Medi-Cal used during one's lifetime. For those of you that aren't used to the lien, this is something that takes a little while to get your arms around, but it's a consideration that I think advocates and families and persons with disabilities are going to want to study when they're looking at which tool works for them. A couple of frequently asked questions real quick here, and I'm only hitting a few here. The Department of Treasury and Social Security have recently given guidance on many questions that folks have about Eble accounts. So one of the questions that comes up here is, what happens if the state passes laws before the final regs are implemented? And what this is telling us is that the Department of Treasury is saying that an Eble program will not fail merely because the legislation or account documents are not in full compliance with the final regulations. The Department of Treasury is looking at working closely with programs like Juliana's here, and if there's something not quite correct, they're going to work it out. And the Department of Treasury has actually a very disability-friendly history, and will make a great partner for this. The Department of Treasury and the IRS intend to provide transition relief, and they're going to provide sufficient time after issuance of the final regulations in order for changes to be implemented. So once again, we're seeing as far as the Department of Treasury and CMS and Social Security, we're seeing more guidance, more instructions, and that kind of thing. So, you know, once again, you shouldn't really be concerned that maybe all the rules haven't been worked out, because once again, everything's going in the right direction. So in other words, if an Eble account will if you open up an Eble account, your account will not be suspended simply because the federal regs are not finalized here, and there's going to be plenty of notice for changes and that kind of thing. So this is something really important. Who is in charge of the Eble account, okay? And as I like to say, we all look at disability through our own prisms. So somebody with, you know, one type of disability in a situation may look at things differently than, for instance, somebody who has a loved one with an intellectual or developmental disability here. And we just have to look at, you know, every situation, learn as much as we can, and find the right option. The proposed regulations make it clear that the designated beneficiary is the owner of the account, and that the presumption is they will manage the account. Well, the question comes up, what if a beneficiary lacks capacity to establish an account? And what the law says here, and the guidance that we've gotten from the Department of Treasury, is an eligible individual's agent under a power of attorney could establish the account, and if none, his or her parent or legal guardian may establish the Eble account for that eligible individual. So each of these individuals would be acting on behalf of the designated beneficiary, and they can open or manage the Eble account and perform any of the actions of any other individual with the signature authority over the Eble account. And once again, if you go through all the regs, it makes it really clear is that the job is to really here assist the person with the disability who has the final authority. If the beneficiary lacks capacity, is not able to exercise signature authority, then once again you can get that authority either under a power of attorney, assuming that the Eble beneficiary has the capacity to sign it, and if none, a parent or legal guardian of the designated beneficiary. Of course, in California, legal guardian means conservator. It's pretty much the same thing. So, do payments from an Eble account for shelter cause an ISM reduction? Now, just to touch on this a bit, and if you go to our YouTube channel, we have all sorts of videos on housing, but one of the things that sometimes is a little hard for folks on SSI to make any sense out of is that if you have a situation where, let's say, a family member or a special needs trust were to pay the rent directly for somebody who is on SSI, what happens is their SSI is reduced dollar for dollar, capped at what's called the presumed maximum value. So what would happen is, let's say, for instance, I were to pay Erica's rent, and Erica's rent were $600 a month. If I were to pay the landlord, her benefits would be reduced by $264.33. And that's often a difficult thing for folks to rationalize, but those are the rules, and a lot of times it's perplexing. Well, here's something really exciting about this, and by the way, we do have some Social Security folks on the line today. So the Social Security Administration recently directed that distributions from an Eble account do not count as income regardless of whether the distributions were for non-housing qualified disability expenses or housing qualified disability expenses or non-qualified expenses here. So they further had clarification here that for a housing-related qualified disability expense here, that is if retained into the next month, that we could have problems, and then we would start counting the normal resource exclusions. But the thing that's really cool about this, and where I think many folks, and I know Mary with her Housing Coalition folks, they're really excited about this, is that you could actually, if Uncle Steve puts money in the Eble account and the Eble account pays the rent, we're not going to take the $264 and change reduction in benefits. That's going to amount to about $3,000 a year, and that is a lot of money for folks with disabilities. Anyway, the Eble account is a new law in situations, and we're seeing an expanding number of situations where this could be an easy way to shelter assets and still stay qualified for SSI, Medicaid, Medi-Cal. There's going to be a great need for broad education about all the different options for setting aside assets. And the other thing with it is that, that this is a great platform for us to start talking about what Tony was mentioning about the real struggle that folks have living well below the poverty level here, and the need really for sustainable funding from all different sources. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn this over to our featured presenter here, Juliana Crist. And, the first thing I do want to say before this is that Juliana has been very open in the way that they've been working in Ohio, because I've talked to many advocates in Ohio and many disability attorneys who that Juliana's been able to tap into, and so there's a great amount of talent and brain power that's gone into this. And Juliana, you've done a terrific job here of working with all these resources, and I'm excited about your program.
Great. Much, Steve. I appreciate it. Well, thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here to talk to everyone. We are very close to the finish line on launching our program. So like Steve said, my name is Juliana Crist. I'm the director for Ohio's Eble plan, which we are calling Stable Account, stands for State Treasury Eble Account. And I'm going to dig in and then hopefully leave a good amount of time for questions at the end. So just to give you a few quick bullet points on overview, our state treasurer's office, my boss, Treasurer Josh Mandel, we are administering this program for the state of Ohio. We have a lot of great information on our website. I would encourage you to visit it. It's stableaccount.com. You can sign up for updates, so if you want to be notified when our program launches, you can give us your email there. There are a lot of good tools, so there's a quiz you can take to find out if you're eligible to open an account. There are a lot of details about what is a qualified expense, how this interacts with your benefits, how the accounts work, what the investment options are. There are some good FAQs as well, so encourage you guys to use that as a resource. A couple quick things. So like Steve said, these were modeled after existing 529 plans. So it is more like an investment account, more like a 401k or a college savings 529 account than a bank account. Right now we are a direct sold plan. In the future, we may consider adding a broker sold option. So if there are any financial professionals in the audience, just know that. But for the time being, we are direct sold. So participants would enroll just through our portal by themselves. All of the accounts are online. So one of the biggest questions I get is, what bank do I go to, right? Where do I go to open an account? You do not go to a bank. You would just go to our website. So when the plan launches, you would just go directly to stableaccount.com, and the enrollment is entirely online. All of the account functionality is also online. So you contribute online, you can withdraw money online. It's very similar to an online banking system that you're probably used to through Chase or whatever bank you use. I also want to touch a little bit about how we got to where we are with Ohio, to give you a sense of kind of the customization of Stable Account and also the resources that we brought to bear. This was a difficult build, I will be honest with you. Our office started working on this as early as, I believe, February of last year, very shortly after the federal legislation was passed. Our legislature was very supportive of the program. They gave us a $4 million appropriation, which is the largest in the country. And we were able to use that, and I should say we will spend every bit of that on building the program and really making sure that it's customized. So it will be similar to, if you're similar with college savings accounts, but it really is geared towards this new population, the new functionality that Stable Account, savers and spenders will need. We have a lot of people on the team, so we've been able, because we have so many people, so many employees working on this, we've been able to get a lot done in a short amount of time. We are also working with a lot of vendors in this space. Intuition, Eble Solutions, they're an existing 529 record keeper for college savings plans. They are going to be doing our tax reporting, record keeping. They're our program manager. We've worked with 3 different outside legal firms. We have an investment advisor, that's Marquette Associates out of Chicago, who's assisting us with our fund choices. And for the time being, we have chosen Vanguard Funds, so they're our provider. And then we are working with the wonderful Andrea Fierstein, who's our 529 consultant that many of you, I'm sure, know. So let me go on to the next biggest question we get, which is when, right? When can I get an account? So right now, we are in our pilot program. So we do have a number of accounts on our system that have been opened. We are watching those for a number of weeks, though. So the program isn't live to the public just yet. We want to make sure that we, do our due diligence, watch the system, make sure money's moving correctly, and work out any bugs that we might see before we do launch. We've always said that we wanted to be up and running by this summer, and we're still on track to do that. I do not have an official hard date for when we will launch because, like I said, we still are in pilot testing and want to make sure that goes smoothly. When we do launch, though, we are going to be a national program. So you do not have to be an Ohio resident to open a Stable account. Anyone can open an account. Not all states are going to be doing that. So some states are going to be limited to just their residents, but we will be a nationwide program. So let me take you through what it looks like to actually open an account. Again, it's all online, and it is free to do the online enrollment. It takes about 20 minutes, and you can either do it yourself, so if you are an individual with a disability and you do have power to manage your own finances, you are free to set this up for yourself. However, if you have a child or a loved one who maybe has a developmental disability and would not be able to manage this account by themselves, then you can open the account for that person. Okay? So those individuals are what we call authorized legal representatives. In order to be an authorized legal representative and open an account for a loved one with a disability, you have to fall into one of the 3 categories I have listed here. So you have to be a parent, a guardian, or someone with financial power of attorney for the individual with the disability. Those are set by law, so that's not a policy decision. I don't have control over those, but we do often get questions. For example, if you are a trustee of an individual, you cannot, that does not necessarily mean that you can open an Eble account for them. We also get questions from rep payees through Social Security. They cannot open an Eble account for someone just because they are a rep payee. You would have to get a power of attorney or a guardianship for that person. So it is a limited category of people there, but for good reason. The other point I wanted to make is that if you are an authorized representative, and let's say maybe you have more than one child with a disability, or you are a guardian for multiple individuals with disabilities, we've designed the system so that you can actually manage all of those accounts under one single username. So we've done that because we realize there are a number of people who will fall in that category and want to make the system easy to use for them. So when you go on to our website to log in, first you're going to put in your basic personal information, address, social security number, date of birth. Then you will also make a number of certifications, so representing your eligibility to open an account. And I'll go through those a little bit more in detail. But again, this is designed to be an online system, so you do not actually have to turn in any paperwork, any diagnoses, any doctor's notes up front. You also want your bank account information so that you can make an initial contribution. And then when you enroll, you will be making your investment selections at that time. You will actually be choosing different portfolios to invest your money in. The minimum deposit is $50. So that's all it takes to open and set up your account and get it going. So let me dig a little bit into how you certify your eligibility. First thing I would encourage you to do if you're doing this for yourself or for a client or a loved one, take our quiz on stableaccount.com. It's a very simple series of yes or no questions, and in a couple minutes it'll spit out an answer that will tell you, yes, congratulations, you're eligible, or no, it sounds like you might have some roadblocks, and please call us if you would like to discuss. But that's the best way to get yourself acclimated with the eligibility criteria. The other thing I mentioned earlier, the certification is online. So it's a series of check boxes and questions. There's no paper. You do not have to give us a diagnosis. You don't have to go do a medical exam. It is all online. You will essentially be certifying under the penalties of perjury that you meet these requirements. So this is, for example, this is a screenshot from what the enrollment website will look like. So this is the first question that someone is going to be asked in order to document their eligibility. So there's 4 main criteria. Steve went over these a little bit, but essentially you will select one of these. And there's 4, like I said, there's 4 main paths to showing your eligibility. The first, if you're on SSI or SSDI because of a disability, then that's an automatic path to being eligible. You can also check and see if your particular disability is listed on the SSA's list of compassionate allowances conditions. If you're not familiar with that, just Google it. It's a lot of diseases or more terminal conditions. So that's, again, an automatic path to eligibility. The last option here is self-certification. So I want to highlight and emphasize, you do not have to be receiving any kind of government benefits in order to open an Eble account, right? There are additional benefits to you, obviously, if you are receiving SSI or SSDI, in that it raises your asset limits. But even if you are fabulously wealthy and do not have SSI or Medicaid, you can still open one of these accounts. And a lot of people actually, we think, will do that. For example, if you have a child with a disability, and perhaps your income is too high right now, but you know that you're not going to be around forever, and you want to start stocking away some money for your child to spend easily when you're gone, this is a good tool for that. And the other thing would be tax benefits, right? The earnings are tax-free. And some states actually give tax deductions for contributions to an Eble account. There's no federal deduction, but there could be a state deduction. So again, for individuals who don't have benefits, there are still advantages, government benefits, there are still advantages to opening an Eble account. So those people would probably select this last criteria here. And that means that you have been diagnosed before the age of 26 with a disability. You have to certify that you have a diagnosis, but you do not actually have to provide us with that diagnosis up front. If you pick that self-certification route, the IRS requires us to ask you for a couple additional data points, just your doctor's name, address, and the date of your diagnosis. The other thing the IRS requires us to ask or to make you certify is that you do at least have a diagnosis on hand. So while we do not ask you for it up front, the IRS or the program could ask you for it in the future, so you at least have to certify that you have it available. And Steve made the point earlier that some individuals, you know, maybe you didn't get a formal diagnosis or something, or maybe you didn't start receiving benefits until later in life. But as long as you had your disability, as long as the onset of your disability was before the age of 26, then that's the real marker for eligibility, right? It doesn't have to do with when you started your benefits or when you were formally diagnosed. That the time starts running from the onset of your disability. The other question that we ask you is whether or not your disability is permanent, right? So since this is an IRS tax year program, technically everyone has to reattest to their eligibility every single year. Now, for some populations, that's a silly question, right? I do not want to bother a parent who has a child with Down syndrome every year to say, hey, you know, does your child still have Down syndrome? That would be an unnecessary burden, obviously. So if you do fall into that category where your disability or your loved one's disability is permanent, it's just a simple box you check, and then we won't bug you. We won't keep asking you to recertify. So we take care of that on the front end. So that's what the certification process looks like. Again, it's designed to be just a couple quick questions and you're good to go. So let me start talking about how you use these accounts, right, the functionality of them. So we'll start with how you get money into them. These aren't trusts, right, so you can't put assets into them. It's cash only. To put a contribution in, first of all, anyone can contribute, okay? It can be the individual's own funds. It can be parent, grandparent, neighbor, employer, business, trust. It doesn't matter to us where the money comes from. You can do an electronic transfer from an existing bank account into your stable account, or you can also mail in a check. So Steve talked about this, but there's the $14,000 annual limit for these accounts. And then at least for the stable account program, Ohio's lifetime limit is $426,000. Now the way that works is we are treating this as a balance limit. Okay, so it's not truly that you can only physically contribute $426,000 and then you're cut off for the rest of your life. What happens is once your balance hits 426, your contributions are suspended. So you can't make any contributions if your balance gets that high. You can keep earning, so your balance can keep climbing, but you have to stop your contributions. Now, if you spend down, so let's say you take out $26,000 and your balance dips, then you can resume your contributions. So it really is meant to be a lifetime product that you can take money out of and then resume and just continue going with. You do not have to track your contributions. So our system will automatically reject any amount of money that's going to put you over those limits, right? So you cannot accidentally contribute too much. The consequence of that would be that you would have a tax penalty. So we have tried to take that worry off people's minds. If you're contributing electronically, the system will automatically kick it out. If you're contributing via a check, or we still do a check against your check when it comes in via the mail. So what will happen is if Grandma sends in a check for $20,000, we will take $14,000 and put it in your account, and then send Grandma a check for the remaining $6,000. We'll send that back to her. So again, that's just a safety valve for people so that they don't accidentally go over those limits. The other way you can get money in is you can create a gifting event. So if you're familiar with different platforms you might see on social media like GoFundMe or other types of like those, we have something similar in the stable account platform. So what you can do is you can create an e-gift event, right, for birthday, graduation, Christmas, what have you. You import any email addresses that you have for family and friends, and then our system will send out an email with a link inviting those people to contribute a gift to your account. And then it will also track who actually contributes so that you can follow up with a nice thank you to that person. So that's getting money in. How do you get money out? Again, this is online. Withdrawals are free, and there are no limits. The one caveat, obviously, that everybody knows, Steve talked about, In order to be compliant with the IRS regulations and the code, your withdrawals have to be for qualified disability expenses, and that's that list that Steve went over before. Now, we do not, so stable account, me, I do not ask people, and we will not ask you what you plan to spend your money on when you go to make a withdrawal, okay? There are a number of different disabilities out there, and we have no way, of tracking if something is actually going to be qualified for one person or not. So it is really up to the account owner to keep track of that and to verify that what they're spending their money on really does help them and assist with their disability and is a qualified expense. Now, even though stable account will not ask you what you're doing and how you're spending, Social Security and the IRS can. So since this is an IRS, a Treasury program, IRS has the ultimate compliance authority. So they do have the ability to audit people, right, through the normal tax audit process and ask for documentation of expenses. Now, obviously, this hasn't happened yet, but we think it'll be similar to, if you're familiar with, an HSA or something similar, and if you're audited, you have to keep a paper trail and prove, you're actually spending your money on things that were qualified expenses. The other ways that you can get money out are, again, via electronic transfers. You can send your money to your personal checking or savings account. And you can also transfer it to our debit cards that we have with the program that we're calling the stable card. So here's a mock-up of what the card looks like. We are kind of projecting that stable participants are going to fall into kind of two general buckets. That's going to be the spenders and the savers. So the spenders are going to need an easy way, right, to get money out of their account on a daily basis. If you're using this for basic living expenses or paying rent or daily prescriptions, weekly prescriptions, we wanted to make it easy for people to spend the money. So this is the solution that we've come up with. It is a loadable debit card. So what that means is it's not the same as what you're used to probably with your checking account. So it doesn't actually pull money directly from your stable account. You actually load discrete amounts of money onto the card. So for example, I would log into my online stable account. I would say, I want to take out $100. I want to withdraw $100, and I want that $100 put onto my stable card. Then I would take my card to Target or CVS, wherever I'm going, and I would have only $100 available on that card to spend. The reason we did it that way is because we heard a lot of feedback from the disability community, especially parents, who said, gosh, I really like the idea of giving my child financial independence, but I'm also a little bit nervous, right? Maybe they haven't done this before or they're still learning, and you don't want to set someone up to accidentally spend too much money or, God forbid, to be taken advantage of. So the ability to put just smaller amounts of money onto the card, we thought was a good protective feature for people, again, who want to have some financial independence but not open themselves up to losing the money or some other kind of issue. It's almost like kind of an allowance program. But of course, if that's not a concern for you, you can feel free to put as much money on the card as you want. But at least it gives parents and guardians the option. The other thing that you can do with this is it keeps a really nice record of your spending habits. Okay, so if you ever do get audited by the IRS or you are ever asked to prove what you're spending your money on, you can just log into your card account and pull up your history, and it's a great way to keep records. It's also a single source of funds, so the only way you can get money onto this card is from your stable account, right? So you don't run the risk of commingling funds with your personal checking account or somebody else's checking account. It makes it really easy to do reporting. For example, if Social Security is asking you monthly what you're spending your money on, it's just an easy one-stop shop for you to show what you're doing. A couple other features here. So if you are an authorized representative for an individual, by default, if you request a stable card, it will be sent to you as a representative. But if you do want the individual to have their own card, you can request a companion card for them. So both cards will have the same money on it. It'll pull from the same account. You'll just have two cards, one for them, one for you. It also allows us to add in a little bit more protection on the accounts. So, for instance, there's no cash access with these cards. Okay. Again, cash is makes it easier for people to be taken advantage of. It makes it easier for people to commit fraud, and it's hard to track. Right? There's more difficult record keeping with cash. So we didn't want to open people up to those risks. The other thing we can do with this card is turn off certain types of merchants, again, as a protective measure. So, for example, there are some types of vendors that we can say pretty easily, hey, this isn't going to be a qualified expense, right? So liquor stores, online gambling, adult entertainment, those kinds of things, the card will not work at. We can turn those off. And in the future, we're adding on a couple different components here. One of them being what I just mentioned. We're hoping to be able to add card-by-card restrictions. So if you're on merchants, so if you're a parent, what we want you to be able to do is set the types of merchants that you want your child to use. So you could go into your child's card and say, listen, I only want my child to be able to go to this specific grocery store, or I only want this card to work at, the CVS pharmacy over, down by my house. So that's a functionality we're working on. We also hope to add online bill pay in the future and different types of record-keeping mechanisms, receipt imaging, memo lines, and different ways for you to categorize your expenses in terms of unqualified or qualified expenses. Okay, so brass tacks. What are the account costs? Enrollment is free, $50 to open. Subsequent deposits can be as low as $1. There are two main types of accounts, monthly maintenance fees. Ohio residents, $2.50 a month. Other states are $5. I want to stress here that, we have some people who see that and thought, oh my goodness, why are you gouging out-of-state residents? So that's actually not the case. What we have done is just the reverse. So the $5 is the actual cost of these accounts. What we have done is we have used part of our appropriation to actually subsidize the Ohio rates. So the Ohio rate is actually lower than what it really should be. And as much as we love all the other states, California and everybody else, we just cannot, unfortunately, use Ohio taxpayer dollars to subsidize everyone else. So that's why there's the discrepancy in those rates. So it's the same thing. There are some asset-based fees. That's just a percentage of your account. Those will be taken off the top of the earnings for the account, so that's not something that will show as a true debit from the account, but it is assessed. So I won't go into too much detail, but like I mentioned, these are not checking accounts, right? These are investment accounts. So you will be given 5 different portfolios options that you can put your money into. 4 options invest in Vanguard target risk funds. So again, this is just kind of aggressive to conservative investing. 1 option is an FDIC insured option. So we think that will be useful for people who are going to be spending their money more on a daily basis or using this as a short-term need. I just wanted to touch on the fact that we do have a dedicated customer service center. They've undergone a lot of training, especially for individuals with disabilities. They're actually housed at Intuition, which is our record keeper, so it's not an outsourced kind of deal. They're an in-house provider. The only restriction that they have is that the customer service, our folks cannot give financial advice. So if there are any financial professionals on the call, this is where you can really add a value-added service. If you have a client who is having trouble, selecting which target risk funds are good for them, that's where you can maybe help out and provide some advice, since that's something legally we cannot do. One big question I always get is, okay, great, Ohio will be up and running soon, but should I wait, right? Should I enroll with Ohio, or should I wait to see what my state is doing? My advice is always don't wait, because you can enroll with us now and then roll over your account later on to your own state. The reason I would encourage people not to wait is because, again, we have that $14,000 account limit, contribution limit, and if you wait even a year, you've lost out on the ability to put in a whole another bucket of $14,000, and you won't get that back. Right now, we can't roll over from College 529 savings plans, but there is a bill in Congress right now. I don't know its chances, but there is a bill to make that a reality right now. So I know that a lot of the folks in the audience are trust attorneys and different kind of estate planning people. So I wanted to touch on just what I thought some good points about stable accounts are. I will give a caveat. So I am actually an attorney by trade, but I am not a trust attorney. I'm not anything near an estate planning attorney. I have gotten lots of good advice from those folks. But these are some of the things. I think they're stable and trust are complementary products, right? They can fill gaps that the other cannot. Okay, so we do not see these as competing products. I think that they can work hand in hand. And here are some of the good things that I think stable can do for you or maybe your clients that perhaps the trust cannot. So the biggest one is that these accounts are cost effective, right? They're free to set up for folks. The biggest thing in terms of expenditures is that you can pay for housing, right? There's a little bit of a broader spending power, but we have people that show up to meetings and presentations that we're doing, and they say to me, I am here for one reason, and that is to find out if I can pay my rent with this account. So this is really, I think, the biggest game changer for people, and you can do that with Eble accounts. The other thing is that there's no first-party, third-party distinction. So when you're setting up an account, it doesn't matter where the funds to source, where the fund source is coming from. We also don't have the age limit, the 65-year-old age limit for some trusts at the time of establishment. You can establish an Eble account regardless of your age. The age limit only comes into play when you're determining eligibility on the front end. The accounts are also easy to close, right? So there's no such thing as a termination process or a wind down for an Eble account. You close it just like you would be closing a checking or a savings account. So that's just a little bit of an easier administrative process if you no longer need the account, or let's say you no longer have your disability. The other point I wanted to make there is that the broader point is that with these accounts, your money is never completely locked in, right? So while you do want to be spending it only on qualified disability expenses, you're not doing anything illegal, right, if you take the money out and spend it on a non-qualified expense. The consequence is just that you're subject to a tax penalty, right? So it's similar to if you were taking an early distribution from an IRA, right? You can do it, you just have to pay taxes on it. Now, I do want to clarify one point, though. The tax penalty that you would pay only applies to the earnings portion of the withdrawal. Okay, so a quick example. If you have $100 in your stable account, and $90 is your principal, and $10 is your earnings, and let's say I take out that $100 and I, blow it on something that's completely not a qualified expense, I would have to pay taxes on that, but it would only be on the $10 portion, right? So you would pay your normal income tax rate plus 10%, but only on the $10 earnings portion of that withdrawal. So for a lot of people, that's not going to be, it's not going to be a terrible hit for them. We've also heard from people that stable is a good way for them to treat their children equally, right? I've had moms say to me, I have a child who I know is not going to pursue higher education, but I had 529 college accounts for my other kids, and I felt so terribly guilty not having a similar savings account for my child with a disability. And so for those folks who maybe don't need to go through the full administrative process and set up a sophisticated trust, this can be a good way for them to have, parity amongst their children and treat them the same way and have similar types of accounts for them. The other big distinguisher, I think, has to do with the Medicaid payback. So Steve talked about this earlier, but with Eble accounts, the payback only starts from the moment that you open the Eble account. So it's not a lifetime payback, right? If Medicaid paid $10,000 for my services when I was 30, but I didn't open my Eble account until I was 35, Medicaid cannot get a payback for that original $10,000, right? It only starts running from the moment I open the account. Now the next bullet point I realize is probably the same for most types of trusts, but it's not that if your loved one passes away, all the money immediately goes to Medicaid. You can still pay for funeral and burial. You can pay for outstanding qualified expenses. And the other thing that you can do that I'm actually not sure, probably many of the folks on this call know better than I, but you can also deduct any amounts that you paid as part of a Medicaid buy-in premium program that your state can have. And you can deduct that from the amount that you would have to pay Medicaid back. The other thing is that these accounts can be established, opened up, and run by the individual themselves, the individual with a disability. And not all trusts, right, will work that way. So this is a good way to give people, I think, a sense of financial independence that maybe they haven't had before. There's also the availability, depending on what your state laws are, that this could be an added tax deduction for you, any contributions that you make to an account. There's also no federal income tax on earnings. Another benefit of that is that there obviously are no separate returns to file like you would have similar to a trust. So that is it. I know I went through a lot of information, but I wanted to make sure we saved at least a couple minutes for questions. And I will say, if you're not comfortable asking a question here and now, please feel free to email us. You can email me or our team, and we are happy to field any questions that you might have. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Steve, and we can open it up.
And a couple of comments before we, go through questions to maybe ask our panelists their input on some of this. One of the big things with this is the ability to use it for folks on SSI without the ISM reduction. One of the questions, I think, as Ellen goes through this that we're seeing over and over again is, can you take either a self-settled or a third-party special needs trust and feed it into an Eble account? We are getting indications from Social Security and CMS that you can, but we've yet to get it in writing. Logically looking at this for a third-party trust, that would be the estate planning trust. I couldn't imagine where that's going to be a problem. So I can imagine as a special needs practitioner, as Juliana is saying here, it's not, do I go with an Eble account or do I go with a special needs trust? I think for many families, when you tie the two things in together, you get a pretty incredible tool here. So for example, and I'll use my niece as an example, if I set up, we have set up a trust for my niece. If my trust in turn takes the funds in that trust and puts $14,000 a year or whatever the gift tax amount is, and it turns around and pays the rent, then there should be no ISM reduction for housing. Versus if the trust paid for the housing directly, we would definitely take the $264 reduction. A lot of education is going to be necessary around this, but this is one of the many uses of Eble that I think are pretty great. And it's one of these things where I think many of my clients will, not only will they get a special needs trust, but it'll be tied in with an Eble account. Ellen, would you like to fire off a few questions here?
Yes, I will, and I just want to say also that if some of these questions have been answered, I apologize. I was trying to keep up and maybe missed some stuff, so I might be asking again. But I'm going to start, just kind of go in order, and so if you want to add questions to it, please just feel free to do so, and I'll try to keep up. So the first one is from Nancy, and she wants to know is if a trustee of a special needs trust sets up an Eble account, can the trustee have legal capacity over the account?
Juliana, do you want to tackle that or shall I?
Yeah, I can tackle that. So first of all, I would say a trustee cannot necessarily set up an Eble account. I talked about earlier, you have to fall into one of the three categories of parent, guardian, or power of attorney. So if you don't fall into one of those categories, you actually cannot set up the account on the front end. But as long as you fall into one of those categories, then you do have full administrative rights over the account.
And for a lot of special needs practitioners, if you're doing this, and oftentimes, depending on your state, you may be setting up that special needs trust under a conservatorship, which is a guardianship. Here, you may want to ask for those powers, and it's one of those things where you're going to need to work through your counsel and try to find the best way to make this work.
So, and when you say parent can, this is from Robert, and when you say parent can open up an account, in some instances, is that applicable when disabled person is an adult?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. So from Victoria, my 20-year-old son with a disability has an education IRA that he is using for community college books. The balance is under $5,000. Can this be transferred to an Eble account?
So yes, we get a good number of questions about rollovers from other types of accounts. Unfortunately, that has to do more with the account that the money is coming from than the Eble account. So in terms of Eble rules, we don't care where the money comes from. As long as it's cash, we can take it. But you would want to check, you know, it would be a restriction on what your IRA withdrawals are. So it's the same thing with rolling over money from a trust. That's not something that really, those aren't Eble rules. Those have to do more with the trust rules. So unfortunately, that's not a question I know the answer to. That would have to be answered by the, you know, if you have an IRA or somebody who, you know, whoever set that up for you, they would be the best person to answer that.
So Megan wants to know, will the certification that Stable goes through to set up an account be used by SSA to verify eligibility for the Eble account's exempt status? Or do you know if individuals will have to independently verify their eligibility to SSA?
No, we handle the certification process. So as far as I know, SSA has not told us that they will want to do any kind of independent verification. And actually, because this is a Treasury program, not an SSA program, I think actually the compliance would be handled by the IRS anyway. So they could technically audit someone, right, and look into whether or not the certification was valid. For instance, if you were self-certifying and, you know, we ask for your doctor's name and address, they might at some point ask us for that information and just look into it and make sure that that's a real doctor, you know, a real person, that kind of thing. But there's no other independent process to certify your eligibility, right? IRS can double check the process that we've done, but there isn't anything else to do.
Okay, so the next one is from Nancy, and I don't know if you may need to elaborate. It just says contributions come out first, question mark.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I'm assuming that if you put in $100 and you're a Californian, then you're going to take out 60 first, right? So we've got 40 left, and then if there's since it's
is the question maybe that earnings don't come out? So like your principal contributions would come out first. If that's the question, then the answer is no. So it's a prorated type of thing. So if you have $100 in your account and 10% of it is earnings, right? But and then you take out $10. Then we would say 9 of that is principal, 1 of that is earnings. So it's just a prorated kind of numerator, denominator, multiplication kind of thing that we do there.
Okay. Next one is from Brian. Since a Stable card is not a Visa or a MasterCard logo, who will accept?
Oh, it is MasterCard.
Okay. Um,
And we're
Okay.
seeing more and more of the use of reloadable cards and that kind of thing. So I wouldn't expect there'd be a lot of problems.
No, right. You can swipe it anywhere you can normally swipe a MasterCard.
so Gabriel wants to know, would the money transferred to a stable card be considered a resource for SSI and Medicaid, or would it still be considered to be in the stable account?
That is a great question. So it is considered a distribution from the Able account because it is a withdrawal. So it's treated the exact same as if you had put it into a personal checking account. But as long as you are planning to spend that money on a qualified expense, then it still does not count as a resource for SSI purposes. Okay? And what the SSA has told us is that there's no time limit on that. Right? So if you take out $500 and put it on your card because you think you might have a big medical expense coming up, but then the expense goes away, as long as you still at all times have that money tagged to spend on a qualified expense, you can keep it indefinitely on your card.
Okay, so
And I will say one of the things that I did cut out and will make available to viewers and for those that are currently viewing this and those that watch this later is the Social Security through what's called the POMS, the Program Operation Manual System, has some pretty involved explanations about when the funds being held are going to count as a resource and not count as a resource. So for those of you that actually are going to be assisting somebody administering one of these accounts, once again, the Social Security has given us quite a bit of guidance here, but it was just a lot more complicated than we could have gone through in this amount of time.
So Margie wants to know, is the $14,000 per person or total? In other words, can many different people put in $14,000 per year?
That is total. No, so it's not like $14,000 from mom and $14,000 from dad. It's a hard total limit.
And Sally wants to know any more specifics on the rollout date, closer to June or August?
Yeah, when are you going to do this?
Yes, I know.
It's everybody's question.
I know, and unfortunately I don't, and I'm not trying to be coy, I really just don't know. I don't even personally, it's not like I have a date and I just can't share it. I really don't have a date. If I had to guess, I would say it's closer to June, only because we have already started our pilot program and that's well underway, and that's the last step before we would do a public launch. But I don't have a hard date circled on the calendar yet.
So we're well past theory. You're actually testing. So this is relatively imminent, especially since you look at that we've been watching this legislation for pretty darn close to a decade. So we're getting very close.
So, and this next question was just answered then, because it just says Nebraska was just announced a June 30th date for their Able plans to begin accepting accounts. So Ohio does not accept. Does Ohio anticipate accepting accounts before? You just answered that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so.
So the answer is a definite maybe.
Yes.
So Eric wants to know if a special needs trust were to put money into the Able Trust. I can understand how it works around the IKMS problem, but does this not take away the special needs trust ability to exert discretion? What would the consequence for that be?
Eric, I'll take this on. Right now we're getting indications that there won't be a problem, but and Eric is administrator of trusts as well as I am. As far as the specifics of that, it actually isn't clear. So far it doesn't look like there's going to be any repercussions. This is one of the reasons why those of us who work in the special needs industry and work with benefits, we need to really keep up with what's going on, because these are questions that folks have across the country, and we will get answers as time goes on. So So I know for myself, we probably will, with the Golden State Pool Trust, be using Able accounts for certain individuals. Even though the rules about Able are a lot looser, I'm probably not going to be so loose. So if I'm going to keep adding money to somebody's Able account, I'm going to want them to account back to us. This is a whole new set of rules with a whole new agency, and how is it going to work out? You just have to stay tuned to figure that out.
Okay, and then the next one is for you too also, Steve. Steve, have you heard anything about how HUD will treat rent payments being made by an Able account? Thanks, Bob Brogan.
Hey, Bob, and the answer is no. But we'll figure it out, okay? Has anybody else on the line heard anything from HUD on how this would affect Section 8 and that kind of thing? And yeah, so once again, and that certainly is a big issue here, and the Special Needs Alliance and the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys are really, and Bob is an advocate with both organizations, is really focused on HUD and their erratic rules. So we'll just see how it comes out.
Okay, so Kevin wants to know, is SSA likely to consider payment to an Able account to comply with the sole benefit rule?
Well, I guess I'll take that one on too. The indications that we are getting is that that it will comply. My expectation is a lot of these things will be answered at the Stetson conference in October. That's usually where these things happen. But, you know, once again, we actually, there's a lot of communications going on about questions and policies between Social Security, CMS, who handles Medicaid here, and Able administrators and advocates, and we're still waiting for that information to come out.
Okay, Margie wants to know if the doctor who declared disability is now retired, do you use his name or the current doctor? I have a letter from her original doctor 32 years ago.
Yes. Well, first of all, that is excellent record keeping. But we do not, so that is actually something that the IRS has not been clear on. For now, we are, I think you should feel free to put in your current doctor's name, because there's also going to be situations where maybe the doctor has passed away. So I think what IRS is really just looking for is some way to verify if they ever need to. So the best person, I think for now, would be to put your current doctor. If we do get better guidance from the IRS in the final regulations, then we will certainly post those updates on our website.
Okay. And I know we're going to have to tie this up. Did you have one last one here?
Yeah, I have Steve from the from Amanda, who sent them to me ahead of time. Just want to make sure we've answered those. So she just has two. Is there, and the first one was, I think I sent this to you already, Juliana, the SSA question. Is a self-settled D4A or D4C permitted to distribute funds to a stable account without penalty?
Yeah, so I believe, Steve, that's what you had answered earlier, that you're getting indications that yes, but no, nothing in writing, and I have not heard anything different.
I think so. I think the thinking that we're hearing, and once again, this is secondhand information, is that they're considering it a transfer from one exempt resource to another exempt resource. Since we're dealing with people's benefits and their livelihoods and that kind of thing, I know for myself, at least on first-party trusts, I'm going to wait till I see it in writing before I start authorizing it. On third-party trust, it's just hard for me to imagine where that could be a problem. This probably makes, Ellen, were there any more questions?
Yeah. Does the answer change if the stable account turns around and uses the funds for rent or other shelter expenses?
And I think the answer is no.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then last one, what would happen if the stable owner loses his or her disability determination? Could the stable account be closed or distributed without Medicaid payment, income tax due, and concern with distributions being qualified medical expenses?
Yeah, so I'll tackle that. The first part of that question is what happens if, for example, you lose. So I should say eligibility is for an account is not tied to your SSI determination. So you could lose SSI and still be eligible for an Eble account as long as you still have the disability that made you eligible for SSI in the first place. Now, you could have a situation where, for instance, say someone has a disease or a condition that goes into remission, and you no longer have, or a cure, and you no longer actually have the disability. What would happen in that instance, the Eble rules say that you can continue to use your account and contribute to your Eble account at least for the remainder of that calendar year. But starting on January 1st of the next calendar year, you can no longer take or make contributions. The account can stay an Eble account and still get all the benefits of an Eble account. For example, in case your disease does relapse or you regain your disability. We didn't want to be throwing people in and out, right, of the disabled account status. So that's practically how it would work. You would have to be careful in making withdrawals if you lose your disability status, right? Because if you don't have a disability, any expenses that you incur are not going to be qualified expenses. To the second part of that question, if you close your account or just distribute all the money from your account, then yes, you would avoid the Medicaid payback, because the only way that Medicaid would get paid back from a stable account is that they have to actually make a claim against the account itself, right? So if there's no longer a stable account, then there's no longer any pocket of money for them to get paid back from. Now, practically speaking, if the money just goes to the individual of the state or to something else, like into a trust or something, then obviously Medicaid could get it through some other avenue. But if you no longer have your disability and you close your account and you use the funds for something else, then no, then you've avoided the Medicaid payback. The one consequence you would have, and this is the last part of that question, is that if you close the account and you take the money out for a non-qualified expense, which if you no longer have a disability, it would be a non-qualified expense, then you would be subject to those tax consequences. But again, those would only be a tax and a 10% penalty on the earnings what you've taken out.
And that's a pretty important concept, because those of us that have been studying it, we're looking at the penalties, and they seem more of an irritation than a deterrent. So,
yes, that's.
Yeah. So, you know, and it's one of those things, once again, we're all going to need to study. I know we have run a little bit over. I am not surprised, because this is such an important development, and Juliana has been outstanding as far as collaboration and that kind of thing. And I will warn you, much to my surprise, if you ask her team questions, they will actually answer you. So, for those of us who do policy work, sometimes that's a little hard for us to get our arms around. But Juliana, you and your team here have been incredibly responsive. I know we're all excited about your program. For myself, I just want to make a pitch here, is that, and going back to, you know, for instance, why we asked Tony to be involved in this, is that Eble is a new tool. It's a tool that's going to work very well with a lot of our existing tools. We're learning quite a bit. But the important thing I think that we all need to do as advocates is not only study this, but also to really work this year, for the next couple of years as this goes out, to educate families and persons with disabilities in the communities about the plight of many folks with disabilities in these programs that are underfunded, the amount of funds that it takes for many of the disabled loved ones we work with for things that we take for granted are incredibly expensive, and we're going to need a combination of ways to pay for that. You know, both government funds, but also family funds and self funds. And so this is really a step in the right direction. As a special needs trust practitioner, here, and as an advocate for folks with disabilities, this has been a wonderful platform to really talk about what the really big issue is the need for sustainable funding. And hopefully one of the things that Eble will do is will draw us as a country to really have that discussion about how are we going to fulfill that promise of deinstitutionalization of well-funded programs in the community so that folks that were traditionally institutionalized can enjoy things that, once again, we all take for granted. So, Juliana, I'll give you the last word here. And with that, it looks like our recording is taken, and hopefully this will be posted very soon.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you. Thanks, Steve, for having me on. I hope this was helpful. Like Steve said, I'm happy. We're an open book, happy to answer any questions that anybody has. If you're an advocate or you work for a state or a private organization, please feel free to email or call me. My personal email is just juliana.crist, C-R-I-S-T, at TOS, that's for treasurerofstate.ohio.gov. So feel free to use that anytime, and thank you guys so much for your time.
With that, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank the folks for listening and for a wonderful webinar.